Mallard. Happy to be here. I know Wooqer has a lot of customers here in the audience. Thank you so much. The question I got asked most when I was entering the room was, what is a revenue officer? So for clarification, it's a relatively new title in the US, but it means I run sales and marketing. So traditionally, you would have a head of sales and a head of marketing, so this way I can, conflict with myself if one isn't supporting the other. So here from California, basically my presentation today is how do we take a global view of technology to improve retail sales? I apologize, it's not showing on my screen as well.
Green. It will show there, it will show here.
Got it. So the presentation for today, I brought sort of 5 key categories that I thought would be helpful for this market. Winning the retail marathon around the globe is really the key factor for brands and retailers today, not just in India, but also in multiple territories. So being able to think globally in how you apply technology, but also use that technology locally. Not every product is going to fit in every market, but a predominant thesis is that I want to make one application that can work in multiple geographies. Specifically important for brands as they start to expand into emerging markets, because they want to have the same brand representation, whether you're in China, whether you're in the US, whether you're in the Philippines. Everyone's trying to engage customers. You heard that from the panel earlier. So what can technology do to bring greater engagement with your employees and then consequently greater engagement with your customers? Everyone around the globe is trying to adopt different labor, different training, different ways to have employees communicate with each other with the intended purpose of driving bottom line sales. How do you give them more time, more attention to focus on the customer? Brand compliance and consistency, as I was mentioning, if you're Red Bull in the US and you're Red Bull in India, how do I know that my Red Bull end cap looks the same regardless of what geography I'm in? More and more with some of the global brands, as they expand aggressively, the ability to have eyes and ears in each local market and then feedback and a full loop accountability makes this increasingly important for them. And then as a subset of that, if I'm managing stores around the globe or managing brands around the globe, what kind of visibility do I get when I sit in my central office, whether that's visual, results, engagement statistics, but what sort of dashboard? And then, of course, any dashboards built on data availability. So what's my way of collecting data today? And this is more about cloud adoption than it is about physical enterprise solutions. But how fast are enterprise solutions moving to the cloud? And in different markets, different regions, that state of adoption is varying. So on the global side, how do I manage globally and act locally? It's a challenge for every company that starts in one geography and ends in multiple geographies. I think the biggest example of this is SKU management, pricing, any of those ultimate last mile type of engagements with the customer. So just because it started as one SKU in one country and ended up in another, how do those kind of things transcend point of sale and multiple systems? You see that in every geography. Customer engagement, how do I reduce tasks to make my associates more available for customers? This is probably the #1 theme across the world. And it isn't necessarily about labor reduction because different territories have different labor costs. It's really, why is my most expensive labor focused on tasks most often than focusing on the customer? And so there's large movements, Wooqer being one of them, of course, but there's other platforms that really are focusing on how do I reduce tasks, make them more efficient, so that my highest, most engaged employees can in turn be my highest, most engaged employees to my customers. And so we see this a lot, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in fast casual, whether it's in convenience stores, however, whatever verticality you might be from, that often your most expensive labor, your store managers, your district managers, et cetera, are often spending time more on paperwork than they are necessarily serving the guest. So whether you're in India or whether you're in the US, this is a predominant theme globally. Just how do you take the talent of your best employees and apply that to your customers? And then on the data availability side, I'll just sort of jump ahead here a little bit. Sorry. Struggling with the clicker. Obviously, I've not been clicker trained. You'll see, sorry, messing this up. So in terms of brand consistency, the globalization of the top 250 retailers, as you can see, are relatively low penetration on a global market. So in apparel, you have about 26 countries down to diversified at 6.7. So more and more emerging markets are making up more and more of store portfolios, and so consequently you can't expect Western tradition to adopt well locally. So these top 250 global retailers are going to continue to grow and dominate across geographies. So this is actually one of my favorite quotes, Goldman Sachs last year. So the retail of the future will most likely be a retailer of the past, only different. India has a wide heritage of retail tradition, as do other countries. And it's this constant reinvention, whether you're talking bricks and clicks, whether you're talking omni-channel, all those pieces are really reinvention of the same retail concept. So whatever the label du jour is, chances are that that label will be different in 12 to 18 months from now. So the constant evolution of who we are and what we are to customers is not going to change, it's just going to continue. So it's always interesting to do some survey work around what people are willing to invest in. So both of these charts I think are quite telling. The one on the left is the top 10 strategic priorities sourced from CIOs and CTOs. And as you can see, personalization, inventory, CRM, empowering associates, digital transformation, all rank rather high. And then when you look at where they're actually placing their money for spend, it's a very similar analogy. So 86% of retailers in this survey are actually going to spend money on customer engagement. That could mean a variety of things, but it's a pretty wide swath of spend. 81% are going to focus on associate engagement and improving the expertise around associates so they could serve guests more. Digital and interactive signage and self-talkers and those types of things probably skew a little bit more towards grocery than fashion. And then obviously omni-channel will continue to be a greater investment, and you heard that from the panel earlier, which I totally agree. It's not a bricks or clicks environment, it's an omni environment. And in fact, omni itself has even become rather dated. I actually think it's sort of connected commerce or unified commerce is predominantly how people are looking at that today. And then of course, it's very hard to measure without retail analytics and data, which 70% continue. So this is a global survey, but I think it is applicable both to this market as well as others, that spend categories are really focused around employee engagement, customer engagement, and visibility. So for customer engagement, there's lots of elements around this. You heard this from the panel earlier. I think one of the largest trends that I see around the globe as I go from country to country is really this focus on digital transformation. Now that probably means different things here than it does in the UAE, different in the US, but really it's really reducing redundancy, reducing paper, reducing tasks, and then obviously moving to a mobility solution. Customers aren't standing in one place, associates should be standing in one place. Often that requires them to have information with them on their purpose. That usually intends using some sort of digital guide, which you could see via signage, a handheld device, a tablet. This concept around effort shift. So do all these pieces of technology, when added to the employee, allow them to shift their effort towards the guest and not the task. And then of course supporting video and training, both in audit format or in compliance format, and allowing their photo file sharing, geotagging, things that make it easier from a management perspective of looking at tasks. Have they been completed? Were they completed on time? were they completed in the store that they were supposed to be completed at. So all of those pieces are really sort of dominantly shifting labor from tasks and allowing that labor to then be reappropriated to guests. Often in India, I get asked, why technology should replace labor, because labor is not considered a large operating expense. I would actually challenge that in India you run some of the highest labor I have ever seen, because you do have so much access to people. So if you looked at labor as hours and not budget per se, you actually spend more hours serving the guests than I've seen in most other areas of the world. Let's make sure those hours are for actual serving the guest and less task. And so as I mentioned before, brand compliance and consistency. This is especially important in markets where we have store-in-stores, end-cap placements, places that are representative of a brand inside of another brand. It's very, very hard to have visibility to brand standards and execution when you're sitting in another global office. So as brands are starting to move to emerging markets, that ability to ensure consistency is hard enough in your own country, let alone in locations around the world. So the ability to provide visual updates, visual imagery that shows what your execution can look like in real time or close to real time around the world becomes increasingly important if you have a brand that has extremely high standards. A brand that doesn't want to be near other brands, for example. If you're Levi's, you probably are not going to be happy if your brand is next to Lee. And so how do you ensure that that isn't happening if it's clearly in your guideline? The customer-centric training that supports those brands. Why is Levi's different than Lee, and what should the associate have? A few of the earlier panels mentioned, sometimes in the fast fashion space, they have new brands, new trends every week. So how do you keep the associate current on what those new elements are? And then obviously, how do you then take that customer voice of what's happening in the store, and how does that get all the way back to Levi's in San Francisco in this case? So the ability to get feedback, give direction in a closed loop environment, in near or close to real time, that's how brands are approaching the market today. And when they're looking for partners that are in market, the partners that have that technological edge of being able to provide that information is really the superset of partners that they're going to naturally be attracted to. So at Wooqer, a lot of times when I meet with customers, they ask questions that are, can you integrate my point of sale data in Wooqer? Can you integrate my inventory system into Wooqer? Anything is possible with time and money is usually my standard answer. However, there are things, in fact, that what the retailers are really asking for is data visibility. They want a central point of entry for all their data regarding all their stores. So what they're really asking for is a business intelligence tool, a BI tool. And while Wooqer does a small portion of that and we can show data in a very visible and digestible way, once people start talking about performance data, I usually ask them, are you using a BI tool today? In India, it appears that business intelligence tools are just sort of at the beginning stages. If any of you are Microsoft customers, you get Power BI for free, to give a little plug for Microsoft. However, the ability to see data from multiple sources in a single view, on a dashboard view, is really directionally how management visibility is moving. We provide execution direction and execution feedback, but once people start asking about sales across multiple geographies, inventory about multiple geographies, turnover rates, conversion rates, all those pieces are really better presented in a BI tool. And I think for the Indian retailers in the room, this is an area that could help you drive your business in a much more efficient way if you were to look at some of these pieces on one single dashboard. And of course, you can't do any of the prior without data availability. So the single biggest trend around availability is actually cloud adoption. So whether that's cloud infrastructure, whether that's SaaS infrastructure that's based on a cloud, the ability to move data seamlessly around the globe in a near real-time fashion is really how people are expecting to have visibility and actionable data in the future, if not right now. I think there's probably a myriad of solutions in the room. Some are probably on-premise, some are cloud, but predominantly the cloud businesses and software that runs in the cloud is really the wave going forward, so that you have good availability as well as the most current updates to that software available. And with that, I will take any questions. Anyone have any questions?
Ma'am, we'll take the questions with the panel discussion. You're part of the
course.
panel, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Jen Mallard.
Thank you.
For that very informative